As our students embark on the journey with the Lost Tools of Writing 2 curriculum, they're asked to take on a new challenge, very distinct from the Lost Tools 1 curriculum. This challenge prompts us to prep a little. I decided that a little video would do the job best. A student is introduced to the concept of an issue in Lost Tools 1. This comes first in the form of a question. Should some character do some act? I'll use as an example a well-worn issue from Antigone, the first book that our students tackle in Cycle 2. Should King Creon order Antigone's execution? For the first phase, called Invention, students are asked to collect affirmative and negative tidbits in an initial discovery exercise called the Annie chart. They primarily use the famous 5 common topics to do this, and Lost Tools 1 spends the entire Invention curriculum developing the students' familiarity with these 5 common topics and the questions they inspire in order to accomplish this task. Once a student has a sense for what might develop into an argument for or against the characters performing the given action, he or she converts this original issue into a thesis. The student might argue that, quote, King Creon should order Antigone's execution, end quote, merely swapping the word should with the subject of the sentence and replacing the question mark with a period in order to accomplish this thesis statement. The student might have chosen the opposite tack and would have simply used the word not to do so. This simple expression, as one of my students put it today, sort of freezes time at the moment of the decision that the character made, and the paper is written as if reality might unfold one way or the other, whether the word not is used or not. The author, like everybody else, knows exactly what actually happens in the book, if the character actually did the action, as the story unfolded, when we know how everything turns out, and in fact, that knowledge sometimes informs students' arguments. Likewise, knowing the ending can inform arguments for the antithesis. So, if the student decided to argue that, quote, King Creon should not order Antigone's execution, end quote, one argument at disposal might be, quote, because this will result in tragic death, even the tragic death of Creon's own son. Now, an astute student might employ the subjunctive mood in order to emphasize that what happened in the book might not have been the only possible outcome. For instance, instead of arguing that King Creon should not order Antigone's execution because this will result in tragic death, the student might say, quote, because this could result in tragic death, or even, quote, because this would result in tragic death. But the rest of the paper can follow the present tense that's established in the original thesis, King Creon should order Antigone's execution, again as if time were frozen at that moment when King Creon was making up his mind, and the student is trying to send an argument into King Creon's mind to persuade him to follow through and order the execution, or to stop and decide not to instead. This is effective enough and is a great way to exercise the student's brain throughout the Lost Tools 1 years. It has been rightly said that Lost Tools is a thinking curriculum more than it is merely a writing curriculum. But it does strike many a reader of such students' papers as awkward when the reader is tempted to say, but wait, Creon did order Antigone's execution. Teachers, tutors, and others in the know suspend thoughts like this, and they learn to adapt to this stage of writing. However, as students mature, they need to begin to think in the past tense. Books have endings. Characters' choices have consequences that actually play out in the stories. And significantly, Lost Tools 2 asks for a student to mature and to focus on the new task of judging the acts of characters in the form of a judicial address paper, which is distinct from the old persuasive essay papers in several ways. So what does this look like? Well, instead of arguing that King Creon should order Antigone's execution, a student is going to argue that King Creon should have ordered Antigone's execution. Some students attempted this in their Lost Tools 1 years and found that it inspires the need for past perfect and past progressive tenses, subjunctive mood, and plenty of apparent complications. With a little patience and attention, students can do a splendid job of this, and by the time they're Lost Tools 2 students, they are ready to take on this challenge. Now, in Lost Tools 2 vocabulary, this statement that King Creon should have ordered Antigone's execution is called a hostile evaluation. This is another way of saying that the thesis is a defense of King Creon's actual choice. He really did order Antigone's execution, and this student is defending Creon's choice to do so. The phrase hostile evaluation simply indicates that this is hostile to a prosecutor who might want to charge Creon, accusing him of wrongly ordering Antigone's execution. By contrast, a student might want to take the prosecutor's position and argue that indeed King Creon should not have ordered Antigone's execution. And this one is called a friendly evaluation, as opposed to the hostile evaluation. Friendly, that is, not to the defendant, Creon, but to the prosecution, wanting to convict Creon of wrongdoing. This prosecutor's job is to indicate that the character in the book made the wrong choice. This helps us to see why we need to think in the past and past perfect tenses rather than writing in the simple present tense. Students must learn to think of the book as a documentation of what actually happened, even though the book may of course be fiction. What actually happened? Well, Creon actually ordered Antigone's execution in the book. Want to defend that? Well, then your thesis is, quote, Creon should have ordered Antigone's execution. Want to prosecute him? Well, then your thesis is, Creon should not have ordered Antigone's execution. Supporting arguments often still fall squarely in the past tense. For instance, if you're defending Creon, you might argue that, quote, the law stated that anybody who buried the deceased among the enemy army was to be executed. The law stated, past tense, buried, past tense, was to be executed, past tense. But other times, arguments will become rather subjunctive while still falling into the past tense. For instance, while you're still defending Creon, you might also argue that if Creon had made an exception in Antigone's case, his followers would have lost respect for him, accusing him of favoritism, nepotism, or flat-out capriciousness. I wondered that, quote, if Creon had made an exception, placing it in the past perfect, but the past tense could have worked there too, quote, if Creon made an exception. But the trickier part of this sentence is the part that says, quote, his followers would have lost respect for him. As a less mature author writing in the present tense, the student might have merely said, quote, his followers would lose respect for him in a hypothetical future, or, quote, his followers might lose respect for him. But now that we're indicating that the deed is said and done, even in the distant past, we have to remain consistent to that tense. This is a new challenge and half of the purpose for this video. The other, and I'd say larger half purpose for this video is to really clarify this judicial address motif. Hopefully, understanding this fundamental bit will be of great value, paying dividends as the years unfold and helping you avoid disorientation leading up to late discovery. There's more. The Lost Tools 2 curriculum emphasizes the task of specifying that a given defendant should or should not be punished for a given action. So here's the translation of our defense statement. Quote, Creon should not be punished for having ordered Antigone's execution. Notice two things. First, the word not is needed because since we're defending his action, we need to say that he should not be punished for it. That is, we're saying that he did nothing wrong, nothing deserving of punishment. Second, notice the participle expression, quote, having ordered. This comes with the territory, as we need to clarify what he would be punished for having ordered the execution of Antigone. You may ask, why Lost Tools 2? Does it need to be so complicated? But trust that there is value to exercising our students' brains in this way. As a sidebar, note that the student should take no responsibility for suggesting what kind of punishment would be appropriate for this hypothetical crime, or whether it should be severe, or whether some leniency should be considered, or mercy offered. Mercy must come only after a rightful declaration of whether an act was wrong or not. This is very pivotal to the Christian faith. Christ died for our sins. His mercy addresses our rightly exposed transgressions. We have no business trying to recast our sins as, well, not really sins, and therefore not deserving of punishment. No, rather we sin, and our sins invite what are classically called, quote, just deserts, which means that they deserve justice. We deserve punishment. And in that clarity, we can see the mercy that God affords us, as well as the just punishment, equal to all our sin, heaped on Christ's shoulders. So, students should not recoil at being asked to declare that a character in the book should or should not be punished for something. Rather, they should see this as a burden to identify a clear wrongdoing, to prosecute or an accusation of a wrongdoing that the student wishes to cast down in order to defend the defendant. This does also mean that some potential issues, or at least their supporting arguments, may not hold up anymore. For instance, Edmund should have eaten the Turkish delight. Doesn't sound quite like it would work. But it would, as long as you don't employ a supporting argument like, because he loved the flavor of the treat. If an accuser wants to say Edmund should be punished for eating the Turkish delight, then you, as a defender of Edmund's actions, would want to provide arguments for why he should not be punished, because he either did not do the act, or he did nothing unlawful by doing the act. Whether he liked the flavor or not becomes marginally persuasive at best. However, this Edmund example exposes a face value fault. The original issue would surely be much better off worded something like, Edmund should not have accepted an enticing gift from the wicked white witch. Or by contrast, Edmund should have accepted such a gift. That is to say, there was nothing inherently wrong with accepting this gift. The flavor or nature of the Turkish delight is mostly beside the point, merely making the gift effective or not in the White Witch's designs. All right, let's finish this Creon example. If a student wants to take the prosecuting stance, charging that King Creon should not have ordered the execution, then the prosecuting thesis should be, King Creon should be punished for having ordered Antigone's execution. Notice that the should not have ordered becomes should be punished for having ordered. This prompts the question, who could possibly punish Creon? He's the king. On face value, this seems like a ridiculous proposal, and a student might say, I'm not writing that paper, it makes no sense. The thing to think about here, though, is the possibility of trying Creon in a court. You might imagine that an army of Phoenicians invades and conquers Creon's lands, and then discovers that Creon ordered Antigone's death and decides to put him on trial for it. Or a global war council decides to put him on trial. Or the gods of the Greeks, or indeed God himself, might demand a reckoning, and you might imagine yourself a sort of cosmic counselor in charge of prosecuting or defending Creon's actions. Let's look at this stack one more time. And now let's try another example to see a flip of the defense and prosecution based on another novel's actual unfolding. In Quo Vadis, Venetius receives help from a character named Chilon. Chilon is actually a wily character, selfishly angling for the maximum gains he can extract or extort from any victim he can find, but he does accomplish a task, at least partially, for the protagonist in the book, Venetius. But Venetius, in his anger, orders his slave to whip Chilon, even in light of his success, since the outcome was not what Venetius really wanted. And he's angry. It's a case similar to the classic murder the messenger motif. Here, a student might start with the old-school present tense statement. Venetius should not order Chilon's whipping. But in the story, he actually did order the whipping. So this case offers a flip of our first example. The converse might be simply stated, Venetius should order Chilon's whipping. Casting the original proposal properly into the past tense, we have Venetius should not have ordered Chilon's whipping. This represents the prosecution. By contrast, the defense would state Venetius should have ordered Chilon's whipping. That is, a thesis defending what Venetius actually did. And casting these into the punishment form would yield Venetius should be punished for having ordered Chilon's whipping. That is, he should not have ordered the whipping in the first place, and since he did, he should be punished for it. Well, this might be a relatively easy case to imagine. Assume this was in modern times, and given the details that we seem to know about the case, we might indeed find that Venetius stands in want of justice for having broken the law and ordering the injuring of a man who deserved nothing but compensation for his successful services, in fact. Finally, the converse. Venetius should not be punished for having ordered Chilon's whipping. That is, he had every right to do it, and perhaps was even rightly justified in doing it. He did nothing wrong, and so there is nothing to punish him for. This would be the case for the defense, charged with justifying Venetius's actions. To close, I want to offer one more quick example. Jean Valjean, in Les Miserables, stole a loaf of bread. It got him into the trouble that sets the stage for the saga that ensued. A simple present tense thesis might be, Jean should steal the bread. Since this is such an early event, happening even before the starting pages of the book, it highlights the power of the past tense and the oversimplicity of this present tense freeze-in-time motif of our younger years with lost tools. The converse, though, could be stated simply, Jean should not steal the bread. But in past tense we have, Jean should have stolen the bread, which represents the defense, in this case, since he did indeed steal the bread. By contrast, the prosecution would be, Jean should not have stolen the bread. This, of course, would be Javert's position, for instance. As a punishment-centric thesis, we'd have, Jean should not be punished for having stolen the bread. This highlights a nuance again. You may be arguing here that even if he did it, he's not guilty of breaking a law, or is otherwise defensibly not punishable for having stolen this bread. Alternately, though you wouldn't be able to make this case from Les Mis, you might try to defend the case that Jean did not actually steal the bread. I guess you could possibly go this route if you wanted to establish that the bread was somehow public property, in which case the term steal is inappropriately applied. But you can see how some arguments offer much more challenge than others. All right, conversely, the punishment-centric prosecution would be, Jean should be punished for having stolen the bread. Now, I've told our students that they are welcome to state their theses in either of these two forms, the straight past subjunctive form or the form that invokes the word punished. The Lost Tools 2 guidance is to focus on the punish-centric phrasing, and there are times when this is best, but especially as we transition away from the standard persuasive essay of Lost Tools 1, I'd like to accept students' efforts to merely speak in the past tense, and to grant that the entirety of the book has already occurred. No time freezes at the moment of the issue. But students who want to use the punished form are certainly welcome to.